We wanted to be intentional about celebrating successes and building those relationships because we didn't always want to be the bad guys. We wanted to create a culture where when a school was having a challenge, they would pick up the phone and call us and not be worried that we're going to send that nasty letter or we're going to get the state involved, but rather we're going to be their partners in helping fix the issues so we can get better results for kids together.
You're listening to the Bold by Choice podcast with Vashanta Harris and Jim Gunner. Real talk about charter schools, from the boardroom to the classroom, powered by the National Charter Schools Institute.
Well, welcome, friends, back to the Bold by Choice podcast, where we explore what it takes to create schools of excellence, from vision to renewal and everything in between. I'm Vashanta Harris.
And I'm Jim Gunner. Today, we're talking about a topic that often gets overshadowed by compliance checklists: support. Accountability is important, but what happens when we expand our view beyond compliance? What if the role of an authorizer includes being a thought partner, an innovation driver, and a capacity builder? We've got a special guest today, Don Cooper. Don is living proof that that's possible. As Senior Fellow at the National Charter Schools Institute and the Director of Civic Initiatives at the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Foundation, Don is helping redefine what support looks like in the charter schools movement. Don, thanks for being with us.
Great. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Vashanta. I'm pleased to be here today.
I'm so glad that you're here, and a huge, huge welcome from both of us to the Bold by Choice podcast. I've been amazed to sit kind of like at your feet and learn a lot about the research that you do and some of the work that you do in the space. And that sharp policy mind and your big heart, to be honest, is such a powerful combination. And it's very inspiring to have the opportunity to get a chance to know you and to witness how you bring that to the space. And I'm excited about that. And I think our listeners would benefit from getting to know who you are a little bit more. So I'd like to invite you to share with our listeners, who's Don Cooper?
Well, that's kind of you to say, Vashant. I appreciate it. With an introduction like that, I'd like it if you joined me in more places to
We'll take this on the road.
my work in chartering. I came to this work a lot different than how a lot of other people did. I'm not an educator. I'm not someone who got my start in the classroom. In fact, I didn't really even plan on getting into chartering after college. It was not my area. So things that I'm really passionate about are ideas, really big ideas. So that's why I do a lot of work over at the Gerald Ford Foundation with civics education to help kids think what it means to be an American right now. What are our founding values? What are the things that draw us together as a nation, our commonalities? And that's why I'm passionate about a lot of the work in the charter space, because there's a lot of things that we do and have that bring us together as a movement that I think that we can elevate here at the Institute and through the library to advance excellence for kids on things. So my background is in public policy. And when I was right out of college, I was working in the Michigan House of Representatives as a policy advisor, mostly on appropriations issues at the time. And one of my issue areas was higher education. And because I was working on university budgets, I got stuck with this issue called charter schools. Because in Michigan, a lot of universities are authorizers. I did not know anything about chartering at the time. I called a university lobbyist who I was very good friends with. Her name was Kathy Wilbur. And I said, Kathy, I hear CMU does some work with charters. Can you help me out on this? And she connected me with Jim. And this was probably about 25 years ago. I had a lot more hair on my head at the time. Jim gave me a book called Creating the Capacity for Change, which was written by somebody named Ted Coldry. And I still have that book today. And that's really been my guidepost for this, that charters do great things for kids and get better results for kids because it's a strategy to change the system. And because it changed the institutional arrangements, and it was a way for us to think differently about how we deliver public education for kids. So Coldry's work has really influenced a lot of my career in chartering, and it's been kind of a guiding light for me in thinking about authorizing in a different way. So I'm glad to be here today and share a little bit about that.
Don, that brings back some memories for sure. The rumor was you had a photographic memory, so whatever we gave you or told you, we better be ready to live with it.
Yeah, and it's stuck too. So, and Jim, I think CMU still has that same conference room that we met in that first time too, up in the Boji Tower.
That's probably true. You know, that capacity for change book and so many things that Ted Coldery has written really have shaped and influenced a lot of people. I know it's shaped my thinking dramatically, and it just gives me a smile that I was wise enough at the time to give you that book and it stuck.
Yeah. No, it was great. And again, a little bit of a different way of coming into chartering than others have, because I know so many people who listen to the podcast came up through the classroom. And that's important because the passion that they have for kids shows through. But we need to couple that passion for kids with systemic change and systemic reform that allows good people to try new things for kids along the way. And authorizers can be a very powerful force in that.
So, Don, you've been in a lot of different positions. So, let's just share quickly with our audience before we jump into the meat and potatoes. So, you were a policy analyst in the legislature. Then you worked for Central Michigan University in an authorizing role. Then you worked for National Heritage Academies and helped them expand and grow across the country. Then you led Grand Valley State University's charter school operations. They're now the largest authorizer in Michigan with 80 some schools.
Yep, and one of the largest in the nation as well.
And you also spent some time at the National Charter Schools Institute.
Yeah, that's right. And that's just a real polite way of Jim saying I can't hold down a job. So it's given me a lot of different experience in a lot of different places. And one of the things that I find so beautiful about that is that over my career, I've had the opportunity to see chartering on the idea side. What is the idea of chartering? Policy side, and how do we put that idea into law? And then how do we take that law and put it into action through the authorizers, and then most importantly through management, who are the closest to kids and who are the ones getting great results for kids. Being able to have spent some time in all of the different spaces along the continuum really provided me with a great perspective at Grand Valley to try to think through things differently to allow us to use our resources to do better things for the schools that we authorized.
Well, they also say leaders are always learning, and you're working on your PhD. Do you want to tell us about that?
So, for those of you who are thinking of getting a PhD, a piece of advice is, be ready for it. Doctoral work really is a transformative experience, and it's so interesting. And Jim's gone through this. Many of the listeners have gone through this, but you do your classes and you pick things that you're passionate about, and you learn new things, you learn the skills, and it's very structured up until the point of dissertation. And then you're kind of released into the wild to do your research and check in with your advisors as you need to. So I'm in the dissertation phase right now. And it's just fascinating because it's an opportunity to explore some stuff that I just find really interesting. I'm not studying education. I'm studying policy implementation and what happens in administrative agencies after a bill becomes a law and how they put it into effect. So my area of research is authorizing bodies and what authorizers have done to put charter school laws into effect throughout the nation. And it's been a great opportunity for me to think about things a little differently, to approach the subject of authorizing and charter schools more from an administrative processes side and trying to look at causal links between what were the policy goals established in law and what did the authorizer as an administrative agency do to try to achieve those goals. And probably a different approach than most people have thought of this. But I think in the long run, it's going to provide a few interesting things that could help inform authorizing in the future and also help think how we think through how we implement other disruptive changes in the education space too. Because, once a law is passed, you really need someone to do something with it. Otherwise, it doesn't have a lot of meaning. It's that implementation that gives law meaning. And that's been my area of study for the last couple of years. And that's what my dissertation is going to be on. And for the tens of people who are interested in reading it, once it's complete, I'd be happy to send you a copy.
All right, Vashanta, we're going to be
You're
his
more than
dissertation committee today, and let's put him through the ringer. But, we're fond here at Bold by Choice to say chartering is not a program or a process, it's a promise. And yet your dissertation is right on target as well. The promise of chartering isn't self fulfilling, it's got to be implemented. and authorizing bodies are on the front lines of implementing laws.
Mhm.
And so, Vashanta, let's have some fun with Don.
I'm excited about that. And Don, you actually got me recalling a conversation we had a couple weeks ago. And I believe myself to be a student of yours, Jim's, and Ember's. And something that's becoming fascinating to me is this concept of like, when did authorizing and that term and that work really show up when we think about the charter movement? So, can you share with us from your research and your perspective, what was kind of the original vision for authorizing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And if there's one thing that listeners should take away about the original vision of authorizing, is that there really wasn't one. So the foundational works on charter policy are really focused on the schools. What type of schools might exist, why those schools are important, theory of action, uh, behind allowing teachers and community leaders to try new things for kids, how that will drive innovation within the system, and how we can replicate out the innovation or close it if we need to in some instances. So there was a lot of thought given to that, the role of the school and what the school would do. Authorizers were treated almost as an afterthought. So if you read some of the earlier works on chartering, um, authorizing is discussed in terms of, you have to have some state agency that grants a charter. And then the charter is going to be for 5 years or 7 years, whatever the term is. And then the schools will go off and do good things. And then the authorizer checks in at the end. So authorizing was not something that was necessarily created by design to be a change agent within this, but rather by necessity to convey the necessary authorities to the schools to operate. And looking at the policy of it, I think that's an area that could have been more well developed in the early years. But I also think it was really appropriate to be focusing on the kids and the results that the schools can get for kids too. So what that means is over the last 30 years, we've had a lot of catch up to do and a lot of designing what authorizers look like and what authorizers do by experience. So kind of feeling our way through in this space. And different people have approached authorizing in different ways based off of the context and history of their states.
And I'm excited. By the time this airs, it will have been a few months, but we're heading to Orlando tomorrow, actually, on Sunday, to celebrate in one of our ways that we're celebrating this year, the 30 years of chartering. And what it made me think about is like authorizing is a very new type of role. If we think
Yeah,
about the history of chartering is quite young. And
yeah.
so in those short years, what have you seen the evolution of the body of authorizing work to look like over time?
Great question on that because authorizing has evolved substantially. When I started in authorizing back at CMU, authorizing was very compliance focused. I'm not saying that in a negative way. I know people don't like to think of compliance as a positive thing, but part of our collective responsibility is to provide assurances to the public that taxpayer resources are being well stewarded and that the schools are operating within all of the expectations that the public has for what a public school would look like. So you need an agency to make sure funds are being spent well, to make sure that the meetings are held in an open and transparent context, that all of the policies are put in place in the right way, that your educational program is going forward the way that you said your educational program was going to go. That's all important, but that was the focus of authorizing when I started, and essentially a licensure agency of, here's your charter. We're going to check in to make sure to see what you're doing is what you said you were doing, and then away you go. Over time, I think authorizing has become more nuanced, and we've been able to put some more thought into it about how do we bring together different resources that different agencies might have so there's more of a shared success for kids because authorizers and schools both have a very important part to play, and they both play very different parts in the success that they get for students. I've just seen authorizers rethink, I think what you'd call support in some ways of what they can do to help a school achieve great things without necessarily crossing a line into operations. And that's been really encouraging. And that's something my background has been with universities. And I think universities are really well positioned to do that type of work. And we've done some work with universities all over the country on that. And I just see them at the forefront of rethinking what authorizing can be and how we can work together for shared success for kids in that.
Don, listening to you reminds me of when authorizing was evolving. There used to be a diagram, and it would look at authorizers and it would say, are you high commitment or low commitment? And
Mm-hmm.
are you high capacity or low capacity?
Mm-hmm.
And the goal was to have more authorizers that were high commitment, high capacity. So juxtapose that with also something that gets said is if you've seen one charter school, you've seen one charter school. What's your experience about the variety of authorizers, their commitment, their capacity? Are we talking about all the same thing, or is there quite a variance?
Yeah, there is variance within commitment and capacity, and I don't think that that's a bad thing. Different authorizing bodies approach the work in different ways, and all can do great things for kids. A little bit about my experience at Grand Valley. We would have fell into that top right box, Jim, the high commitment, high capacity. With about 80 schools and 36,000 students throughout Michigan, we would have been considered to be the second largest school district in the state if we were a school district, just behind Detroit Public Schools, but also the only one that would be working with schools as far north as Traverse City, as far south as the Indiana border, and then from Lake Michigan over to the Straits in Detroit. So big geographic capacity, big student reach. We were very well resourced on things. Part of a large state public university that allowed us to have a different type of relationship with the schools that we authorized because we could package resources. We had staff, we had a team that could go in different ways and support schools through challenging situations that they might have been in at the time. And I think we did a pretty good job with that. And some schools really benefited from an authorizer like that. On the flip side, there are other schools that value the independence and autonomy that was promised in the charter space. Have a model and it's a very disciplined model, and they're not necessarily looking for that type of support. But what they do need is someone to make sure that they're operating within the normative expectations of what we want for a public school. I think having authorizers that have different levels of commitment, different levels of capacity allows for real choice in the chartering space because authorizers can pick the schools that they think they can work with best, and the schools can pick the authorizers that they think that they can work with best. And together we can get good things for kids because we're trying a bunch of different models.
Well, that's why we're bold by choice, because we believe in choices and people finding the best match. So, as authorizing evolved, I remember being in lots of conversations about where's the line, right? And when we talked about the line, it was you're the authorizer, you have to judge if they've met their standards, should they be renewed, etc. And so there was this notion of a line that you shouldn't cross because if you did, then you compromised your integrity to be able to be that judge. Um, but we've also had this notion that, boy, high commitment, high capacity authorizers, they see a lot, they hear a lot, they're involved in policy, they've got connections, and that they could support their portfolio of schools more effectively than just being the compliance regulator.
Mhm.
How did you think that through? And tell us about where you went with Grand Valley in your time as the leader.
So I kind of think about the line, and that's a big question when you get into school support, because at what point does your involvement with the school compromise your objectivity in a renewal decision? Though we do want to be supportive and do want to package resources, we have a statutory obligation to provide oversight. So we'd always have to guard against that. One thing we did was we created kind of safeguards within the renewal process for that. Our renewal process was always a team effort, and it always involved external reviewers to ensure that we were not getting too close or not being objective to the schools. And it also involved people from different levels and positions within the organization. So everybody brings a different perspective on things. And sometimes we'd have folks who were really strong advocates for the schools on the renewal team, but that was balanced out by external review. and others on the team who might not be familiar with schools. So that's the first piece, Jim, is that you got to understand what your statutory responsibilities are as an authorizer and put safeguards in place to make sure that you're fulfilling them. So that way you aren't crossing the line. But I think of the line differently than others do. Because authorizing, yes, there are statutory responsibilities associated with it, but I see it really about the public interest. What legislatures have done is entrusted authorizers with the ability to create new schools by issuing charters. And in doing that, we first have to seek the public interest in the areas that we are engaged in. And then we work to fulfill that interest to get better results for kids over time. So different schools will have different responsibilities associated with them. So that line is constantly moving based off of the situation, based off of, what we need to do for kids. I've been in situations where our teams had to jump in and essentially take operational roles in schools at different points in time. And if you were to just look at the literature around what authorizers are supposed to do, that would be a big red flag. But the alternative to that would be a school closing in the middle of a semester. And that would leave a couple hundred kids without a good option for their educations. And that's not an acceptable choice. Though we'll cross lines in situations like that, it is to fulfill that public interest to make sure that kids are getting a good education, that the schools are fulfilling the promises that they had made when they got their charter.
Don, I think that's a great way to say chartering is not just a process, it's a promise. And that when it called on it, you had to step over the line to keep the promise, the higher calling than the process.
And when you think about authorizing in terms of being a steward of the public interest versus as an agent who's administering a process, it changes your mindset on things because advancing the public interest is going to be different in different communities in different ways. So it becomes really hard to have a one size fits all approach to it.
I absolutely appreciate and love reframing the work of authorizing as stewards of the public interest. And earlier, you made a connection that higher education institution authorizers have this incredible opportunity. Positionality, I think, is a part of it with the universities to provide what we call support, right? Or some additional opportunities, if you will, as it relates to the charter schools in their portfolio, the staff that make up those charter schools, and even the students as they progress through their educational career. Would you be able to highlight some of the unique opportunities that you all were able to provide your schools in that role?
The first really big opportunity that we were able to provide to schools was access to our College of Education. Grand Valley, at the time I was there, was the fourth largest public university in Michigan and just had a really great College of Education. And it was something that we believed in. So we were able to provide scholarships to any staff who were completing their masters in our College of Education. And I just saw that as a win-win-win because it was a way that we could bring great work from Grand Valley, the great experience from our College of Education, to help prepare teachers to do a better job for kids over time in their classrooms. So in that way, we began to help improve the practice of teaching and learning. And that was also interesting because it gave the university a second path to improve teaching and learning because most universities who are engaged in teacher preparation do so in a very traditional way, but don't have the same type of hands-on experience that an authorizer has. They don't know the schools. They can't stay connected with their alumni. They don't see the results over time. But by working through the authorizing path on it, you get to experience that. So making our College of Education more accessible was one big first way that we were able to help provide support. And coupled along with that, we launched a multi-year research agenda to start looking at the results that our schools were getting for kids and for teachers, using that to inform our support. And the goal of that was to use that to help inform, potential changes in the College of Education or, just other things that we could do differently. And that's something that's just not possible in a university if you're not connected to a large portfolio of schools on things. You need that body of research. Because we had a good sized team at the charter schools office, we thought about our roles a little differently. So rather than having a team that looked at just compliance on things, we repositioned many of our colleagues to a role that we called school support specialists. So rather than going in and seeing, are you doing what your educational program is supposed to do, we'd look and see, are you getting results for kids? And if not, how do we package resources within our office and in the university to help you get those results for kids? So a very different way that we approach the work. I can't take credit for that. That was something that I inherited from the very first director of the charter schools office. His name was Pat Sandro, and he was a district superintendent in Grand Rapids. And he approached the work as, when a school stumbles on something, we put our arm around them and we walk with them to help them do better. And if they can't do better, we have to fulfill our responsibilities. But when they do better, we celebrate their achievements. So Pat really set the tone for that. And I just kind of helped live that out. One area that I was really proud of that we were able to advance during my time at Grand Valley was the connections that the university had with the students in our schools too. So we were able to create some really great pathways for 11th and 12th graders to come to campus, to enroll in Grand Valley. We increased the number of charter alumni who were enrolled at Grand Valley. That's important because a lot of students who were coming to us were first generation college students from historically underserved areas. So by bringing them up to campus, by showing them the possibilities, by providing them with a white glove experience to help guide them through the financial aid process and the admissions process, it showed them things that they may not have thought was possible before, and just really helped inspire more kids to go off to college. And that, kind of a win-win on that. So those were a few things that we did on the systemic side. Going back to our school support colleagues, each of them approach their work in a unique way. And that's important because no two schools are in the same situation. So by having dedicated staff who was able to bundle and package unique packages of support to them, I think really made the difference, because I never wanted to be the guy in the suit from Grand Rapids coming into a school with a checklist saying, here are the things that we can do for you. I wanted to understand the challenges that they faced, what resources we might have for them, and be able to offer some help, because that's what is going to get results for kids. And that's what's in the public interest, is to put together public resources in a way that get those results.
Don, that's what's a unique combination of you, because you're very serious and studied and learned. But as Vashanta said in the beginning, you got a big heart. And I want to dig into this one, particularly for our higher ed authorizers that are listening. There was a time when the question was, how many students from a charter school attend Grand Valley? And the answer was like, I don't know, or maybe six. I think the answer today is now closer to 500 or 600.
Yeah, that's right.
Take us through that evolution, because one of the goals of charters is to prepare kids for success. And when we talk about colleges, not just getting them to college, but through. How were you able to work with the schools in really a unique way?
And that's something that I think we had a transformative impact on during the 6 years that I was at Grand Valley. And that was really a team effort. So Rob Kimball, a name that people on this podcast might know, was very instrumental in his work in central administration in the president's office and the charter schools office, in helping make admissions for charter school alumni an institutional priority. And my former colleague, Barry Hall, who led the work on a day-to-day basis, in schools, talking to kids, providing great experiences for them in admissions, is really what made the difference on things. So between Rob helping make this an institutional priority and Barry on the ground, we had a really good team in place to do the work, and then it became execution. And a difference that Grand Valley has always had and continues to have, and this is not just within the charter schools office, but in general, is Grand Valley is a very student-centered university. So we want to ensure every student has a great experience at every touch point along the way. So we were very meticulous in design. When Barry and his team would go to a school, at a college fair, work with students on the application process to help them and really provide them with a white glove experience, to help them apply to Grand Valley, understand what it meant to be successful at Grand Valley, go through the financial aid process, get them to campus at different points in time over their career. We would bring students in middle school. We would also host 2 college prep weeks for 11th graders, and those were paid for by the charter schools office and no cost to students or schools to spend a week on campus so they can get a simulated experience of what it means to be in college. But all of the details along the way were what made the difference in students wanting to go to Grand Valley versus wanting to go elsewhere. And even if students went elsewhere, we were really pleased with that because we showed them that there was a bigger world out there and that they could do more than they thought was possible. Our job didn't end once students got to campus. Barry and his team put together a great experience for them over the year. We would look at the university calendar and think of what touch points do we have with students along the way. So when families were coming in for parent weekend, for example, we provided a curated experience for charter families because many of those families may not have been on a college campus or their student is a first generation college student. So working with mom and dad to provide a sense of safety and have them get an understanding that we cared about their child while they're on campus was really important. We provided special tutoring sessions for students during finals week. So that way, we wanted them to pass their classes. We didn't just want them to get to Grand Valley. We wanted them to get through Grand Valley and get a great job and go out and be champions for what we did later in life. So we would help them prepare for exams. And we just had other touch points along the way. And anytime a student needed help when they were on campus, we were just a phone call away and we're happy to nudge and make connections. So that way they were best positioned for success on things.
My heart is smiling because that is when I hear the words wraparound support, not always how it's defined in other spaces, but the way you just so beautifully described, and I think you named like the white glove experience for students, literally why I believe all of us in education get into this work. You all carry that through even with the staff. Can you tell us a little bit about the culture of care with the staff so that they could continue to live and breathe these values so that you guys kind of divide and conquer and provide that experience for kids?
We were very intentional about building a great team within our office. So, and other authorizers are too. And the authorizers that I've worked with around the country have great, caring, committed people. But that was a priority of ours was how do we get the best in who have big hearts for kids, who have the technical ability to do it, and who know their roles and responsibilities better than anyone else. So we spent a lot of time in schools. We would also think of the school year kind of like you think of a year in your house. When you think of your family and you think of the things that you celebrate and the touch points that you have, there are some things that you always celebrate every year, birthdays and holidays, anniversaries. And then there are some things that are a little more ad hoc. Your son or daughter gets a great grade on a project that he or she thought was beyond their ability. So you go out for a nicer dinner, or there's a sports trophy or something. Big part of it for us was thinking through that annual calendar of what are the things that we can do to celebrate successes over time. How do we set the right tone at the beginning of the school year? And then how do we celebrate success at the end of the school year? What we would do, and I think some people would think this is silly, but it really did make an impact, and I'm glad that it's still going on, is at the beginning of the year, we would send essentially a care package to every school leader. It was a box, and we spent probably more time than people think we should have putting that together, but we gave some serious thought as to what was going to go in it. So it would have a cover letter, kind of describing, setting a tone for the year and any big priorities that we thought we were going to have, very positive, very uplifting on things. It would have some sort of gift for the school leader. In Michigan, it snows here a lot, so oftentimes it was a hat or gloves or something that could be used. We'd have something in it for kids. They always like to have a book so in addition to the library, and we'd work with the Library of Michigan to identify a book off of their notable books list for the previous year. So that way it was common. It was something that affected everyone statewide. So it was a common experience on things. Uh, and then we would go out and hand deliver these to each school that we worked with. So that was one opportunity that we would have for our team to go down and talk to the school leaders before the school year started in a non-threatening way. We would bring our school principals in for a principals meeting at the beginning of the school year to talk about any sort of changes that we had on an upcoming basis, to celebrate successes, to learn from them about what they needed. At the end of the year, we'd have receptions and celebrations for great things that were going on. So very celebratory on things. And those touch points may seem a little strange in the authorized world because our job is compliance, right? So why would you do that kind of stuff? Well, we wanted to be intentional about celebrating successes and building those relationships because we didn't always want to be the bad guys. They wanted to create a culture where when a school was having a challenge, they would pick up the phone and call us and not necessarily be worried that we're going to send that nasty letter or we're going to get the state involved, but rather we're going to be their partners in helping fix the issues so we can get better results for kids together. And over time, that worked. That really helped change the culture. Being present in the schools, I made an effort to be in schools as much as I possibly could just to see what's going on. I didn't want the only time that I was in schools was during renewal because that creates, a dynamic, a tension between me and the school leader that I didn't want. And we would try to involve school leaders and board members in as many things as we possibly could to build that relationship. I don't know if it was just one thing that we did. It was a combination of things. And there are things that everybody can do. And there are things that really relate to the approach toward the work, how you approach the work, not necessarily the work itself, if that makes sense.
Don, it sounds like you guys were being bold by choice and really reimagining the role of the authorizer in a way. And it takes me back to what you said is in the public interest, because America doesn't need more compliant schools. It needs better schools for kids. And so that's the primary objective. Yes, we got to comply with contracts and laws and, the accounting and all of the things that go with that. But that's almost secondary to the primary mission, which is making sure that these kids are prepared for success.
There were many times when a school would have an issue that was technically a compliance issue, and we'd work with them to solve it. And then Allison and I would, kind of look at each other and think, okay, do we need to send this letter? And my question to her was, what does this serve in the public interest by doing it? If we can correct the problem, if we've addressed it, if we know what it is and we've done things to mitigate it or help improve, then what in the public interest is served by taking heavy-handed regulatory action? That changed our approach on a number of issues and probably saved some printer ink too of having to generate some of those nasty grams.
So, Don, one of the things that you did, and I'd like you to share with the audience, is you tied what you were doing to the university values and you started talking about operational integrity. Can you tell us
Yeah.
the story behind that?
Okay, backing up, we use the term authorizer to mean two things. So sometimes we use the term authorizer to mean the person who is the director of an office. Okay, so it's like a title. You are the authorizer. But in reality, the authorizer is an institution. Okay. So at Grand Valley, the authorizer was Grand Valley State University, more specifically, the Board of Trustees of Grand Valley State University. I was just an agent to them and reported up and reported out and made recommendations. They were the ones that were vested with authorizing power. So when you approach your functions that way, it becomes necessary that your work in the authorizing office fits in with the overall mission and vision and values of the university. And for charters to be successful over time, authorizing has to be an institutional priority, not just a priority of your office, not just a priority of you, but it has to be an institutional priority. So the best way that we thought to help make authorizing an institutional priority was take a look at the work that we did and reframe it within the context of the university's values. Because in a big university like Grand Valley, it's really easy to say, hey, why are you guys involved in that? Shouldn't we be working on teaching more undergraduate students or growing a master's program or something that's core to what we do? But the better of a job that we did connecting our work with the university's values and showing that it's an extension of why the university exists in our core purposes, we thought the more it would connect the university with the schools and the more we could do for kids together on things. So that meant reframing a lot of our core functions in terms that were more consistent with values. So, as Jim mentioned, one of the university's core values, and one of the core values of the Institute is integrity. We would not think of compliance in terms of compliance, the checkbox system, but are the schools operating with integrity toward the requirements in their charter contract, toward applicable law, and toward the values of the university? And that started changing mindsets. It also started changing the way that we approached providing adjusting feedback to schools too. Because whenever we would send a letter, whenever there was something going on that was, not consistent with the requirements, we would begin the letter or the communication with what you are doing is not consistent with our values as an institution and the law and the charter contract. So the reasons we have to engage in direct some sort of corrective feedback is because it's inconsistent with our values. And if you continue to be inconsistent with our values, we just can't have this relationship anymore. Um, and that changed the approach, and I think it was effective too. And it was the kind of thing where some of the letters, if you got them, it's the difference between your parent telling you that you got to go to your room because you did something wrong, so you're grounded for an evening, versus your parent telling how disappointed they are in you. And it just has a different impact. We recognize that. We also try to use it sparingly as a result of that too.
I love that you are giving color definition and example to what it means when we say it is okay. In fact, it is valuable, a human centered approach to our work. That goes for authorizers. We're talking about authorizers today, but many of us sit on boards. Many of us are school leaders and sit on school leadership teams. And so the lessons can apply regardless of role. And
Yeah.
just remembering that the way in which we treat our humans that we work with and the humans that we teach and the humans that are learning from us really, really matters. And it makes all
Yeah.
the difference in how we are then able to do the work. Like, yes, we have things we have to do by law and et cetera. But I just like my heart is just like leaping. We titled this conversation today Beyond Compliance, and you have really blown it out of the water because it just is so beautiful how you've talked through the role of an authorizer, the support at the school, but also maintaining the integrity of what it means to carry out that charter promise
Yeah.
in the entire nature of everything that everyone has to do.
Thank you for that. And I'm not going to say that we were perfect in the way that we did it, because we were not. There were errors along the way, and we learned from it and evolved and grew. And also, when you take a very values-centered approach to the work and approach it as a stewardship of the public interest in your institutional values, rather than just the traditional approach toward it, you also find that some of your schools or some people in the schools, it's not a good match anymore. And those can be hard. And it's not because anyone's doing anything wrong. It's just not a good match. And those can be hard conversations sometimes. But on the flip side, it strengthens the relationship with the schools that there is a good match on. One of my favorite moments, one of my, you're never supposed to have favorite school leaders, but you do. So, so just a quick story on it. We were working on bringing on a new colleague over at Grand Valley, and long story short, it didn't work out. She accepted the job, and then between the time she accepted and her start date, she decided to take a different position within the school district that she was in. And it was a good position. I think it was the right thing for her to do, given her passions. Fast forward about a year, me and the former candidate and a school leader in our portfolio and a few others were supposed to be in a meeting. And she was really hesitant to come to the meeting with me. Okay, because she thought I'd be mad. So our school leader talked to her before and said, Don's never going to be mad at you for taking a job that gets you closer to kids. Like, you should never be worried about that. He will support you in that. So I just loved that I had that type of connection with the school leader, that they knew my mindset on things and I knew theirs. So we could function better as a team and communicate out the expectations that we had for kids, and that we can all fulfill it in different ways. So that was just one example of the things that you can do when your values are aligned and when you're working together for kids in a more focused way.
Well, as we get ready to wrap, I know this is a little different than what we typically do. Don and Jim, even, what's one piece of advice or one final thought you'd like to leave for listeners today?
So I'll approach the question a little differently. I'll give you the thing that I should have done differently when I was at Grand Valley that I wish I had done differently. And that was to spend more time in schools. I was in schools a lot. I just never felt like I was able to get into them to the extent that I could. And that's part of the nature of the work. But when you go to a school, and what I would have done differently, so my advice to those listening is go to a school through the lens and look at it through the lens of a parent or a potential student, not through the lens of a regulator. And walk through, get a sense for what's going on, the feel, the culture, get to know the team at the school, and realize that you are a part of that team too. So don't think about what's going right and what's going wrong in the test scores necessarily, but think of what you can do to meaningfully contribute to that team in the spot that you're in so that you can get better results for kids. My advice would be spend as much time in schools as possible. Realize that you're part of that team for kids at that school, that your role on that team is going to be a little different depending on what school you're on, and then try to customize the support that you provide based off of the resources that you have. You can do what you're charged to do, and that is to create more great schools for kids to get better results for them.
Vashanta, I'll just wrap that up. You guys know I like books. This reminds me of Covey's The Eighth Habit, which is find your voice and help others find theirs. And what I really hear in Donna is Grand Valley State University found their voice as an authorizer and in the public interest. And they use that to connect and bond with their schools and help those schools find their voice. And when you get to see it in action, it's magical.
Well, Don, thank you so much for taking the time with us today and sharing this gift of your knowledge and your experiences with not only us, but also those that are listening. And there are many takeaways today, but if I were to leave you all with a couple, one, compliance is just the floor. It's not the ceiling. It's a starting place for all of us in our work to kick off, but we can really go beyond the checklist. And in fact, we need to so that we can make the space for true transformation. And then the second is support doesn't have to be soft. It can be strategic. There are ways to really support folks waking up every day with a heart, a mind, and a schedule to support kids and make sure they have a very high quality experience. And so let's open our minds for those of us who haven't to all of the possibilities that that support can be. Next time, friends, on the Bold by Choice podcast, we're diving into who we serve. So we're going to be talking about the major players and stakeholders in this beautiful charter movement. And we'll continue the conversation about what support looks like for all of those individuals. So, Jim, do you have a challenge for our listeners before we
Oh, man, I love challenges. So listeners, we want you to go back. And for those of you that are authorizers, we want you to revisit your mindset. And how are you acting in the public interest? And if you're a school leader, we want you to be thinking about, do you know your authorizer? Are you connecting with them? Do you have your voice? And how can you work together to uplift kids? And as always, we want you to join the Charter Network. Let's build an authorizing field that's bold, innovative, and supportive. And remember that authorizing field isn't just authorizers. It's the boards, it's the schools, it's the kids, it's the families. Because chartering is not just a process, it's a promise that we prove together.
If you haven't already, hit subscribe, leave us a review, and we'll see you next time on the Bold by Choice podcast, where leadership, innovation, and impact come to life.